dispatched a boat to transfer him to the Marine Hospital in San Francisco, but his burns were too great. And very tragically, he died on Christmas Day with his wife Baldwin by his side. He was 57 years old at the time. Now, it's interesting to me, as I've done this research, that I have found so many lighthouse keepers who have died in the line of duty. Lighthouse keeping appears to be a very hazardous profession, and it would be really interesting to know what % of all keepers actually died in the line of duty in service. The Lighthouse board never really published these things. I mean, they sent out bulletins monthly, but they never really talked about all the keepers who were, hurt or had died in service, because if they did that, they'd probably never get anybody who wanted to be a lighthouse keeper. So we really don't know. But again, that's one thing that we do in Lighthouse Digest, is every issue we try to have an in memoriam column, basically a page devoted to a lighthouse keeper who died in the line of duty, so that we could show some honor to them for that. Anyway, while many of the keepers did die, there were many others who did not die. Can't see what that says. That was still juiced. Okay. So there were some that actually had tremendous things happen to them, and very dangerous things happen to them, but they survived. And this particular story is a very interesting one that happened at Los Angeles Harbor Lighthouse back in 1966, in which case the keepers did not die, but had a very harrowing experience and a miraculous experience. This kind of talks about the miracles that happen in order to keep people alive. It was in September of that year that the storm warnings were posted all along the Southern California coast. And at San Pedro, the waves that come up over the breakwater, you can see this long breakwater, it's almost 2 miles long, that leads out to the lighthouse. The 3 coasties that were assigned to this lighthouse at the time were Seaman David Atkins, and this is who he is, shown here. There was also Engineman Third Class Kent Knierim and Seaman Apprentice Richard Mike Miles. And along with them, they had a station mascot, who is our dog here on the right-hand side. His name is King. There's 2 other keepers that are in this photo, but the center man is Kent Knierim in this photo. So it was pitch black around 9 p.m. On the night in September when this happened, and after donning and putting on their rain gear, the 3 keepers decided to go out to see what was going on with the ocean surf. And as they were headed back toward the lighthouse, Mike decided that he was going to go back to smoke behind the paint locker, and so he went back that way. But Kent and Dave had almost reached the lighthouse when Kent all of a sudden suddenly screamed, "Look at that wave, it's coming!" And they turned around, and Dave saw what he estimated to be a 16 to 18-foot wall of water coming straight at him that was roaring like a freight train as it washed over them and headed directly toward them on top of the breakwater. They said that all that they could see was water. In that split second, Kent and David started to run for the lighthouse with the dog with them, but there was really no time to react, and as the wave broke over, in the wader boots, Dave was unable to stay, and it hit him with such force that he was thrown headfirst into one of the 3 steel lifeline cables that are in the breakwater, and he was knocked immediately unconscious, and then the wave tossed him over like a rock into the harbor, and his body sank about 20 feet down underneath the wave. What is generally not known in this story that we found out by interviewing him, Dave is still alive, and we were able to contact him, find him and contact him and interview him for this story. And what is generally not known about it was that he had a near-death experience at this particular point. He said that his life, it was one of those flashbacks where his life passed in front of him, and that he felt like he was floating on a cloud. He thought he was dead, but he heard a voice that was coming from the end of a ray of light that was telling him it was not his time and that he should go back. So he did. In the meantime, while Dave was having this experience of being basically unconscious, Kent had lunged at the lifelines and had almost made it before the wave hit, but he was slammed headfirst into one of the steel posts where these lifelines come across. But he was wearing a steel hard hat that he had used for rain gear that basically made it so that he didn't get impacted, so badly on his head. But as he went over, he held on to the post. So when the wave washed past, when Mike came around the corner of the locker, he was sort of protected away from the wave. But when he came around the locker, he could see a hand that was hanging on the post, and Kent was dangling off the side of the post about 10 feet down off the breakwater. So he was able to fetch him and to haul him back up on the breakwater. They both started looking around for Dave, and they saw him at one point surface, and then he kind of started to make some movements, but then he went back down again. And so they ran back to the lighthouse, and they got a flashlight and they got a life preserver. came back out, and they threw the life vest. They didn't know really where they were throwing. They thought they were throwing to the last area that they had seen him in. Later, Dave says that when he came to and came up, the life vest was right there in front of him. I mean, that's kind of miraculous in itself. The life vest will be right there within arm's reach of him being able to get that in this tumultuous seas that are going on during this storm. So anyway, when they had the flashlight, they were able to shine it to show where he was. Kent decided that he would go assist because it was obvious that Dave was too stunned to do anything. He could barely even hold on to this life jacket. So Kent waited until a wave came up across the top of the rocks, and then he jumped into it and then swam over to hold on to Dave to be able to try to haul him back to the breakwater. Unfortunately, the surf was too strong and they were washed out to sea. And meanwhile, Mike, who'd seen all this going on, goes back into the lighthouse and he calls the nearest Coast Guard station, which was on Terminal Island, which was about a 10-minute boat ride away. This is the real miracle in this story, is that the actual station, the commander, the bosun's mate, had felt that there was something that was going to happen that day. And so he had done a 20-minute warm-up on the boat prior to this actual instance happening and kept his crew at ready condition, not knowing that this was going to be needed, but feeling that this was going to happen. So when they got the call, they could take off. They could take off immediately and be able to go to rescue these men. Taking this apart here. So when they got there, when the Coast Guard vessel got there, they were able to pluck them out of the surf. Both men were suffering from hypothermia at this particular point. Wrapped them in blankets and took them back to the Coast Guard station. Dave was basically unconscious for most of the ride. He was complaining of chest pains, and so they took him off to a Navy hospital boat that was nearby, and it took him several weeks to recover from that. And his friend Kent did well because he wasn't hit in the head as Dave was. But anyway, it took a while for both of them to recover from this. Meanwhile, about 30 minutes later, there's a scratching noise on the lighthouse door. And when Mike, who still stayed at the lighthouse, opens the door, there's King, there's the dog, up on the breakwater, and has his tail between his legs, comes running past him through the lighthouse, shivering, shaking, and quaking, and goes running into a closet, and refused to come out the whole next day. So you got to wonder what happened to the dog, how it got back. And what they assumed was that he was washed all the way, basically going out, but then the storm washed him back, and he got back to the breakwater on his own. So that was also kind of a little bit of a miracle. Anyway, after that traumatic experience, both Kent and Dave became friends for a long period of time, but unfortunately, Kent passed away. But before he did, he was actually awarded a commendation medal for his terrific rescue, for his heroic rescue. This is during his ceremony. Dave Aikens became the chief of the U.S. Coast Guard Holland Mission Rescue Station, Search and Rescue Station, and he later retired in 1881. And he said that near-death experience had changed his entire life. Ken died of cancer, like I say, at an early point. I don't actually have the date on here, but he only was 40 years old when he passed away. It isn't known what happened to King. Nobody knows what became of him. They did keep, many times when the Coasties moved on, they took the dogs with them, and his wife, Kent's wife, is still alive, and she remembered that they had a dog with them, but she wasn't sure that it was King for a period of time there after that, so we don't know if that's actually the dog. But again, it was pretty cool to be able to interview both Kent's widow and also Dave Aikens about the story and find out a lot more of the details than what's in the newspaper article. Anyway, I saved the very best for the very last. This is, of all my keeper tales, this is my personal favorite, partly because of the character of this man, partly because I just found out recently that I'm related to him. So that kind of makes it even more special to me. His name is Edwin Clements, and he was a man of great high principles and moral standards, and it was said of him, quote, "He had a kindly nature, lovable traits of character, and amiable consideration for all about him." Unquote. He was a charter member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, and that's an organization that still exists today. Its motto is people helping people. In order to be a member of this organization, you had to be attested to, you had to be known to have high moral character. And so that was another reason why we know that Edwin truly did have these particular qualities of character. Edwin joined the Lighthouse service in the early 1930s, and after serving at two other lighthouses in Washington, San Juan Island area. He was assigned to be the head keeper at Smith Island Lighthouse in the Strait of Juan de Fuca in 1939. That particular lighthouse is no longer there. It's one of our lost lights. The cliff eroded underneath it, and it fell into the sea in the 1990s, which is another reason it's so important for us to be able to preserve this history and these stories like Edwin's, because it was unknown. This story was unknown when we researched it 3 years ago. Nobody had ever heard of this before. He basically didn't exist, and so it was really wonderful to be able to find out this information, especially of a head keeper from a lighthouse that is no longer here. One of Edwin's assistants at this time, Edwin was 48 years old when he arrived at Smith Island with his wife Bessie. They had no children, and he was able to serve at family stations, so he could live with her. He wasn't by himself, so his posting at Smith Island was as a family. So he and she both were there together. And one of their assistants was this young man, 26 years old, George Welsh, who had his young family with him. He had his wife Josephine, who was 25. He had his daughter Mary Jane, who was age 2. And then he had this little baby, this newborn son, Patrick. This photo was taken only 4 months after this incident occurred, but at the time of the incident, Patrick was only 3 weeks old. He was a brand new newborn. Smith Island has a very interesting topography. As you can see, it has this spit of land that comes out to the east side of it, and on the end of that spit is this light beacon, because when the waves cover over it, the ocean water rises above it, it's not seen and ships can run into it. So they keep this beacon lit at the end of Minor Island. Go back and see that, the end of the island over there. That's one of the keeper duties at Smith Island, was to make sure that the Minor Island light remained lit at all times. Well, kerosene beacon is all that they had there at that time period in the 1930s. It wasn't automated. So it had a tendency sometimes as just a regular flame in a chimney that it could go out. So on the evening of December 29th in 1939, there was a bad storm that was raging, and the light on Minor Island had gone out. And the duty that night fell to George Welsh, the man who had the brand new baby. And he was supposed to attend to it. But because of his young family and his new infant son, Edwin did not want him to go out and risk himself for that. He said, I will go do it, and he insisted on taking his duty. So everybody tried to talk him out of it, and he said, no, we've got to light the light. That's what a lighthouse keeper does, and he was the head keeper responsible for that duty, and so he was going to do it regardless of what. He basically got on into the boat, and everybody lined along the side of the cliff, and they watched him take off, and then they watched the boat swamp, and it overturned, and Edwin went down. He never made it to the light that night. The boat was found upturned on the beach the next day. And the day after that, the Coast Guard found his body that had washed ashore. Basically, the thing that was really sad is that the newspaper reports even got his name wrong. And that's the reason why we didn't know that he was lighthouse keeper, because they called him Edward Clement instead of Edwin Clements. And so anytime anybody ever did a search, it never came up, because they had misspelled it in the newspaper articles. So again, he couldn't even, we found a 1-inch little paragraph announcement of them finding the body of him that had washed up at that point. Anyway, Edwin had given his duty truly in taking George's place that night. It was the true sacrifice of a hero and the true duty of a lighthouse keeper. He completely gave of himself to that greatest sacrifice to the point of giving his life. His sister, later on, in telling the story of his untimely death to her family, was known to say, quote, "That's just the kind of man he was." And there was a newspaper article that was written later by the Canadian Legion, of which he was also a member, that in memoriam of his death, they wrote, quote, "No words can set forth his generous love of his fellow man, and his death was, we know, as he would have wished it, on duty. His constant desire was to aid others." So truly, he lived that motto, people helping people, in that fraternal organization of which he was a charter member. Meanwhile, assistant keeper, lighthouse keeper George Welsh went on to have another 8 children beyond that, and many grandchildren. Presumably none of them would have been there had not Edwin taken his place that night. We were able to contact members of this family. They did not know about this situation. Their father was a very quiet man, and they knew, all of the children talked about this together. They knew that there had something that had happened in Lighthouse service, but nobody knew what it was. And if you can imagine what the guilt you would feel probably if you knew that somebody had died while they were taking your position and your duty. So he didn't remain in Lighthouse service very long. A year later, he left Lighthouse service and went on to do other things. But anyway, his children, he never told them about this circumstance and situation. So it was very, very emotional for everybody to find out the details of this story. And to actually bring these two families together, it was really nice because they corresponded with one another. They're sort of in the area. They're members of the family that are in Washington, and so they were able to talk to each other about this after the fact, the children and the grandchildren of these two keepers. In 2016, we were privileged to hold a grave marker ceremony for Edwin Clements. And this is Georgine. She's the great-grandniece who we got a lot of the information from and a lot of the photos from of Edwin. And Edwin is lying very peacefully next to his beloved Bessie in Crown Hill Cemetery there in Seattle. This is the reason why we have our grave marker program. We do this to be able to bring to light the history and the background of these lighthouse keepers who, many of them who serve so diligently and are unknown by the general populace. We try to bring their stories forward so that people in our generation can understand what they've done and can learn about them, and also people in future generations will also learn and understand that. Which brings us back to where we started, Tillamook Rock Lighthouse, and what's going to go on tomorrow. Tomorrow we're having a grave marker ceremony for our most famous keeper, Robert Gerloff. I'm not going to talk a lot about him here because I want to talk about him tomorrow. I asked those last year, when I gave a talk about him and talked about Tillamook Rock, I asked those last year to act as his family because he didn't have any here in America. Normally we get families involved in coming to these grave marker ceremonies. We normally ask family members to participate, and since Keeper Gerloff did not have any family here in America, I asked last year if anybody who was there who came to my presentation, if they would be willing to act as his family when we come do the grave marker ceremony. So I extend that invitation to you all to be able to come tomorrow, to be able to honor this man for his 25 years of lighthouse service. He was the most famous keeper at Tillamook Rock. He has a very interesting story that I'm going to tell tomorrow. We have here the program, so you can see what's going to be on the program. Please take one, and also a cemetery map about how to get there. The ceremony only lasts about 45 minutes or 50 minutes. We have 3 Coast Guard units that are participating in it. We have Bruce Jones, who's the mayor of Astoria, and also the deputy director of this museum, who will be speaking. Both Nate and myself will be speaking. We have a special presentation, a flower presentation. The Hayward family is going to be there. We hope, if Joe can make it, he's 92. We're hoping that he can make it to be able to place flowers on the grave of Robert Gerloff, because Joe is really the only connection, the living connection that we have with Gerloff. When Joe was a baby, Robert Gerloff sent $20 to start for a bank account for him to his father, Orlo. And so Joe wants to be able to be there if he can tomorrow to return the favor and put some flowers on Robert Gerloff's grave. So anyway, we invite you to do that, to participate tomorrow if you can. If you can make it for that period of time, we surely would appreciate it. Again, the way that you can help us out, actually more than anything else, is subscribe to Lighthouse Digest so that you can actually see and learn more about these stories, these wonderful keeper stories and tales. This is only a snippet of what we have in every single issue. We devote ourselves to being able to do that, to be able to do the research, to find the people, to find the descendants, to find the photos, and to tell these stories so that we can all understand that and preserve this for our future. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here.
And thank you all again for coming, Debra. As always, it was the hour went by really, really fast. Again, we hope to see everybody tomorrow. If it's raining, I have a tent. You'll be protected. Don't worry. Thank you again so much. It was really wonderful. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Partial time.
I want to get a photo. This is Yes, I do.
Well, but we were talking and she just brought her camera and said, yeah. Yeah, so.
You got to see it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, we're gonna go tomorrow too.
I wish I could, it's at 11.
I know, you said that.
Maybe you can video that, I'm gonna try to video it. I don't
I'm not a
know.
video person.
Hi, good to meet you, Alice. I love your kiddos, girls are so faithful. Yeah, he's gonna come from this tomorrow. So he's so nice to be there, but that's one thing. First nice to meet you. This is very simple stuff.
Moses is right here.
You know, anyway.